All right, I think we're going to get started. Maybe some people will trickle in. But hi, everyone. My name's Nicole Morio. I'm the North America Chapter Chair for AMEC. I am also lead North America Insights for LinkedIn. Very happy to be here with one of my favorite people, Tina McCorkindale. Ooh. Tina is the president and CEO of the Institute for Public Relations. If you are not aware of IPR, it's a 65-year-old nonprofit, and it's dedicated to the science beneath the art of PR. So today, Tina is going to be walking us through how communicators can help stop the spread of disinformation. And it's based on the 3rd annual study of disinformation in Society Report. So thank you,
Thanks. Is there, I think there's a slide before this. Maybe. Oh, it's me. Okay, well, that's the, let me see if there we go. So hi, everybody. Thanks, Nicole, for the wonderful introduction. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about disinformation and its impact on our, I don't know how to stand anymore. I'm going to just do me because I feel like the keynote sort of ruined us. When you said, like, stand up, I didn't know how to stand. I was like I forgot how to stand. So I'm just going to, I think I'm supposed to start like this, but I'm just going to, stay upright on my 2 feet. Okay, so this is a really important topic for us, and it came from our trustees who are really interested in fake news. And we deliberately stay away from the term fake news because it has multiple interpretations. So that's why we call it disinformation. So just to sort of level set, this is a really recent case. Does anyone know who this woman is? Has anyone heard about it? Okay, Steph. So this is Nina Jankowicz, and she has a book. I don't remember what it's called, so not important. But she wrote a book about information, and she was elected head of a disinformation governance board that was appointed by the Department of Homeland Security. So in the U.S., the Department of Homeland Security is just what it sounds like. It was established during Bush's administration, but it's to secure the United States. So things like TSA, Border Patrol, immigration, even the Coast Guard fall under the Department of Homeland Security. So they decided to make a disinformation governance board, which sounds like the worst title of a board that you want to have, because number one, their mission wasn't very clear. But they founded this board, this disinformation governance board, and the far right media just took off with it. You can see here the New York Post. So what they said, they referenced George Orwell's 1984, called it the Ministry of Truth, said with this appointment that they're going to take away free speech of Americans. But what the purpose of the board was to coordinate the different departments. FEMA, which is Federal Emergency Management organization, so what they do is they respond to natural disasters. One of the issues when you're trying to do your job effectively is to counter disinformation. So that's what her whole role was, to sort of coordinate all these bodies together. She lasted 3 weeks, and the disinformation board was ruined. This just happened like a week ago by disinformation, which is ironic. So this is a recent, very recent case. And you see that picture is just not flattering. Like, that's not flattering. So there we go. So what we want to do is I want to define specifically what's the difference between misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation is false or misleading information. But we are concerned with disinformation. And what that means is that there is malintention on the part of the actor. So if you have disinformation, it's because I am trying to mislead you. I know the information is false, but I'm trying to skew what you're thinking in a different way. This is what we are focused on. Both are very important. Both are very devastating. But disinformation is really to understand what is the intent of the actor. So here's why you should care about disinformation. Because the thing is that we don't really talk much about it in our industry or in society. We could talk about deep fakes and that sort of thing, but what are we actually doing to help combat it? Have any of you seen the Deep Tom Cruise on TikTok? Okay, if you haven't seen Deep Tom Cruise, this is your assignment. You're getting homework. You have to Google Deep Tom Cruise. But they have a lookalike actor, and they basically made this deep fake with Tom Cruise being Tom Cruise, but it's not him. It's all AI generated with like facial. You have to just watch it. It's amazing, but it's also scary what can happen. But here's why you should care about disinformation. One, it creates an erosion in trust of our trusted institutions that we rely on, right? Number two, it affects mental health, which I'll show you in just a second. We can see what's happening right now with the Russian war in Ukraine, that if you look at the state-controlled media within Russia, that they do believe, a lot of people do believe that Ukraine is the aggressor. And that just shows, well, that's another issue with media, but that just shows how disinformation can have such a significant impact. Incites hate crimes. We just saw this in the US, but there was a shooting in the grocery store in Buffalo, and the person who did it was based on a theory of a replacement theory, and that's one of the motivations for why he killed 10 people in a Buffalo grocery store. And it also increases political polarization of parties, because disinformation is designed to make you angry, and it's designed to make you emotional. Because if it makes you angry, makes you emotional, you're more likely to share it and spread it, and that is the whole goal of disinformation. One, it decreases our effectiveness as an industry to get our message across. It threatens our political process and also reputational harm. And we saw with vaccines, they just released information that of the 1 million people who died in the US, 300,000 could have been preventable deaths during COVID. 300,000, right? Let that sink in. And yesterday, 19 children were murdered in a school shooting in Texas. And 2 teachers. I was so upset. Last night, I was like crying this morning, and Nicole, and it's like hard to even think about that you have these 8 to 10-year-olds who were gunned down by somebody. And what's gonna happen as a result of that is a disinformation campaign that you saw 10 years ago in the Sandy Hook shooting, that 28 people died, 26 children, and those parents have to relive the death of their kids every day with disinformation. People accusing them that it's a hoax, that they're using their children's memory, and that has a huge impact on our society and just us as humans and human beings. And so I want to have a call to say, this is why we as an industry, and a lot of you are media monitoring companies. We're a nonprofit research organization. We've been around 65 years. Clearly, I wasn't the founding CEO. But you know, that this is something that we can do something about because we have the power to be able to do that. So we just released this in February. We're also expanding it internationally. If any of you have interest in this, please come and talk to me because we would love to do this survey here and anywhere really, because we are a global organization. But we released a Disinformation in Society report, and what we want to do is understand what encourages the spread of disinformation, what are the trusted sources and organizations, and all our research is available for free. So you can go to our website. We have a weekly research letter. No, I'm doing promos, Nicole, but you should sign up for it because it's really great and it's free. Who doesn't want more free emails in their inbox? We also have 2 sponsors, but what we did is we did a survey in November of 2,200 Americans and asked them all sorts of questions. It's really exciting, and we used Morning Consult, who's one of our partners. So the first thing we wanted to do was just see how big of an issue is disinformation and misinformation in the US. Now, for all you researchers, I see Dr. Gilkerson here, we did not specifically ask misinformation and disinformation because most people don't understand the difference between the terms. So instead we said false or misleading news or information, or false information or news or misleading information that is deliberately spread, right? So what we found is that 69%, when we asked people about major issues like the economy, healthcare cost, everything you think of, immigration, I mean, the whole list, abortion, gun control, all that stuff, that this ranked close to the top. 69% of respondents said disinformation and misinformation is a major problem in the United States. And you can see the APP means that compared to last year, it increased by 8 percentage points or 11 percentage points. So for misinformation, it was at 61% last year. So this just tells you and this is a representative sample of the US population. So it's not skewed toward one political affiliation or another. So we asked about what are the most trustworthy sources for accurate news and information, and what has bubbled to the top is family and friends. Family and friends are the most trusted sources of information. But one of the areas that is also important to know is that in terms of media sources, local news is one of the most trusted sources. That's print journalism and that's broadcast journalism. Since 2005, 2,100 communities in the US are now considered news deserts because they've lost their local paper. So what we've seen is an erosion in local media. That way people, and what affects that is it makes people less informed. There's also another term called ghost newspapers, which means because of layoffs to journalists, that you have like a shell newspaper. So maybe it went from every day to once a week, and it's maybe a lot of like press releases and not too much information. We also, there's like 60 sources that we asked, but these are the ones that bubbled to the top. And you can stop me if you have questions. But one of the, please yell at me or something. It doesn't bother me. My kids yell at me all the time. So here's what I wanted to show you. And I know you're like, wow, this is an interesting chart. What does it mean? So what we wanted, when we look at the demographic factors, that where are the big differences in terms of perceptions of individuals, it's politics, right? Political affiliation is the biggest determinant for where people sort of evaluate. So what you have in this screen is it tells you, this is on the bottom quadrant, the y-axis, that's what the Democrats, the sources Democrats trust. And then on the x-axis are what the Republicans trust. And what you want to see is where people come together. So if you look at this here, if I don't fall, if you look here, like you have President Biden. Over here, 80% of Democrats trust President Biden as an information source, but only 10% of Republicans. So when you get up here in the local news and local papers, that's where you see both Republicans and Democrats coming together. And that's really important because when you see these other, like Washington Post, and you know, a lot of CEOs are like, please get me in the Wall Street Journal, get me in the New York Times, but it's not necessarily a trusted source across political affiliation, right? If you look here at the New York Times, sure, you have pretty high trust levels. You have pretty high trust levels with Democrats, but it's not too high. It's in like the 30 range for Republicans. So that's why it's so important for the local news. How are we on time, Nicole? Are you going to yell at me when you didn't? What? I need more time. I need more time. Okay, so I'm going to skip this slide. Okay, so I'm going to, it's on the next slide. So what we also look at are differences between who should be responsible for combating disinformation and those who are actually combating it well. As you can see, everyone we asked, they were like, every single source is responsible for combating disinformation. Public relations professionals, you didn't get a break. We're all responsible. They said we were very responsible and we're doing a terrible job at combating it. So I should have put that up here, but you can see it's just garbage. It's garbage, right? We're garbage. All right. So the other thing is, other things about disinformation prolongs the pandemic. Disinformation exists about the COVID vaccination. Notice we didn't skew this to pro-vax or anti-vax. It was a very bland, objective statement. But this is also the impact. When we talk about mental health, look at that far right, sorry, I get my rights and lefts confused, far right chart there. Encountering disinformation makes me feel anxious or stressed. 52%. Over half of the respondents said it makes them feel anxious or stressed. And then you have it infringes on human rights. And only 1 in 4 said it was the concerns or exaggerated. This is a significant issue that we have. All right, so here's what you can do, because you're like, what do you want me to do? Here's what I want you to do. One is train employees, train clients on media literacy and theories. There's a lot of great programs like First Draft who train people on how to be media literate. If you have media literate people, then you decrease the spread of information because then they know how to tackle information sources when it comes to them. There's some great theories like inoculation theory, pre-bunking, which tells people that misinformation, disinformation is coming. Here are the strategies they are going to use. Here's what you need to do. When you do that in the climate change research, it has a significant impact on whether they actually adopt the disinformation. Know where to look for information, know how to share sources. And there's also other things. If it makes you angry, if it makes you sad, if it makes you stressed, that could be disinformation. It's intentionally designed to get you to share it. You're not going to share boring, dumb information, right? So that's why it's important to train employees, to train clients, to send it out, or even just to train society, like host classes or something, become an authority. So this is a lot of stuff, but basically it says that there's a lot of different techniques and behavioral science strategies that people use to spread disinformation. I'm happy to share this with anyone. If you want this, I'll email it to you. But this is over on the far right side. It tells you how to inoculate against misinformation. So we have several publications. One of the publications we have is a Think Before You Link. I know, it's so clever. But it's like a checklist for what people should go to before they actually link and share the information. But disinformation is also designed, when they did an analysis of disinformation during election, it's designed to sow divisions. It's designed to incite hate. There's different things with disinformation of what it's intended to do. Now, and so that's what is the evidence, like making sure that it's understood. The other thing is, a lot of companies, there's a lot of stuff, we talked about purpose, and we're talking about purpose and that sort of thing, but there's a lot of companies who are not following their organization's purpose. They can talk about the values of the organization, but then when you look where they're advertising, if you look at the politicians that they're supporting, they're violating their own statements of purpose. So it's important to review advertising lobbying portfolios. Google estimated that people spend like $20 million+ a year advertising on misinformation sites. There is even a misinformation site where Merck was advertising on a fake, like an anti-vax site, because you just buy like these big pools of advertising online. And so this is really important to do a analysis. And then be a trusted resource for employees about these big topics, that like societal topics or societal issues, that they can come and know that you're a trusted resource. Because that's how you break through. And they'll say, you know what, I know that they know more than anything. And even you as a provider with your clients, that you are a trusted resource of information and you have that answer for them. The other thing is have a proactive crisis response. Call it like a disinformation mission. That here's what's going to happen. Here's our plan when we encounter disinformation. And what I'm going to tell you right now is to fight against disinformation. In my past life, I was a research analyst. I worked for one of the big companies. And I know, we watched it. We watched the spikes. And we're like, oh, it's just a spike. It'll go away in 24 hours and people will get tired of it and leave. But what is the impact of that spike? You had a spike for 24 hours, but people see it. Did they remember it? Did they actually believe it? What is the impact? So it may have gone away really fast, but did it have an impact? And do we have an obligation to do something about it? Here, you should be in charge, the client, the company should be in charge of the narrative. And when people have disinformation or misinformation, it's important to make sure you don't want to necessarily say, this is what they said. You don't want to, emphasize it, like ring that bell over and over again. But you should make sure that they know that you're a trusted resource. So there's a couple things I'll show you and just hold that thought. But support local journalism. We saw that it brings political parties together. Like fund them with ads, buy subscriptions for employees. There are a lot of legislative bills across the world that support pro-journalists and help them. And then offer training programs for journalists so they know what you do. Bring them in, and how can you help them to be more savvy about this. The other thing is be transparent, label AI content. If anything's manipulated, it's that authenticity and transparency that's really important. And add overlays. This is an example of an overlay. What happens in some cases is newspapers may share a picture that's disinformation to show it's disinformation, but it doesn't have an overlay, so it can easily be copied and pasted elsewhere. Or they'll say, look at this fake news, and then it's copy and pasted. You saw the New York Post, that first thing with Nina Jankowicz. So if you were going to be a news organization and feature that, then you should put an overlay on it so they know that it's manipulated. And this is something that's very easy to be able to do. Even when you're putting your whatever it is together, if you have fake news and information, because you don't want it shared out more than it is. And the last thing, I think this is the last thing. Are you going to yell at me, Nicole? Okay. Is support the organizations and nonprofits. I mean, this is really something that we have an obligation to do. And even last night, one of my employees emailed me, and she was like, I am just so helpless. I'm so beside. I don't know what to do. I'm like, well, we have to do something. We have to do something because it's becoming such a problem. And we saw it in our elections this past year. It just infiltrates everything we do in society. And it's something that we need to be more proactive on or in as an industry. I wasn't angry though, was I? No, it was okay.
Oh, maybe a little bit.
Maybe a little bit. Okay.
Questions?
Questions? Yes.
Thank you. It's a very simple question. Thank you. That was really, really interesting. I'm Elizabeth. I work for NATO. I'm interested on finding out whether you work outside of the US at all.
We do, yes. So we're a global organization, and we have so we're not a membership organization like AMEC. We're really governed by our board of trustees. So like Chris Foster yesterday is one of my trustees, and so we have trustees all over Europe, UAE, Asia. So yes, but our publications are more generic. Even though the disinformation one is US, we're trying to expand it. And Asia is like one of our big areas of focus too.
Any other?
But if you want to talk, we'll talk later if you want. Yeah.
I'm interested about your. I'm sorry. I'm Doy. I'm from Manila.
Yes, hi Doy. You're from Manila.
Yeah. We just elected the best president in the world, the worst president in the world, right? So.
We've been there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I sympathize.
And I was wondering, as you were talking about, how do we combat disinformation? And I'm sure you have. You've thought about, what are some of the structural incentives to actually encourage a more wide-scale way of combating disinformation, especially since the main incentive for the platforms that are spreading disinformation, like Google and Facebook, is engagement, which is inherently, helpful.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's also this, get a whole thing about stakeholder capitalism and how we're all thinking about the good of the stakeholders and all that stuff. Yeah, right? Yes. So, but one of the issues, and people talk about their purpose and organizations, but yet they're still funding the organizations who are doing a really bad job of stopping disinformation, right? So you saw yes, I would say there's not necessarily a widespread coordinated effort, but we're not really punishing some of the social media companies who could do a better job of stopping disinformation before it spreads. I know they're doing things like asking questions and labeling things and putting things on top, but there's just too much that escapes the filters, right? So what's the best way to do it? Like when we had the Buffalo shooting, that was last week, the person started live streaming it on Twitch, right? Started live streaming the mass shooting on Twitch. And part of why is because some of the guidelines they have in place. Because other sites will make you join a site for a certain period of time and have a certain number of followers before you can actually live stream. So there's different processes that social media companies can do, but there's a lot of processes that companies like on my board can do that they're not really, right? And so we have all these contradictions in our society where we're like, oh yes, and then we're funding people who are not supporting what's good for society or the values of the company. I did a terrible job of answering. I'm really sorry about your election and stuff. Yeah, with the Marcos debacle, but yeah.
I want to extend that question. I'm Asim Sood from Impact Research. Have you already presented results of this report to people at Google, Microsoft, Facebook? And if not, do you think it'll help if you do that?
I mean, I do know that a couple of them have looked at it. I honestly don't think it would help much, to be honest. And I know that's disappointing, but I think it's a couple levels. I think it's one, a company level. I think it's a social media company level, but I think it's also a societal level. Because no matter what checks and balances you put at the social media companies, my dad, if he knew how to, he doesn't even know how to use a smartphone, but his wife, or like, can share some disinformation like nobody's business, right? So unless you stop her, it doesn't stop her, it doesn't matter. So it's like there's all these different stakeholders that need to be trained and adjusted, and it's finding who's the best source to do that. So I'm trying to think of like, what's the multi-approach so we all have responsibility for improving. Because if people are armed and better consumers about where they encounter information, then it doesn't really matter what Google and Facebook does. I mean, it absolutely does, but you know what I mean. Maya.
Hi, I'm Maya from Commetric. I have a question, might be a little bit provocative, but yeah.
I love a good provocative question.
So,
if it's really provocative, Nicole will answer it, so.
Yeah, okay, so we're very close by to the most serious geopolitical situation currently the world is facing. And one of the responses that the European Union tried to take against disinformation was to block websites. And I come from a post-socialistic country. I don't have my personal memories of living through times where access to information, even bad information, is blocked. But I wonder, what do you think about it? Can we really win a fight against disinformation if we're just blocking it?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think it's very, because then it's like, who's the authority to say if it's bad or not bad? And basically you could say that's the same argument that Russia's using with their state-controlled media, even though it's really like a lot of it's disinformation. So I think if it's false information, that it should be removed. But the issue is that's not necessarily the case. And what we've seen is even like AI filters that take down information, it's not great, right? It's not 100%. And then, yeah, it's very difficult because, I mean, you can't compare with like the EU with what's happening in other countries, or even, you know, if we talk about China and their controlled media. But I think if information is false, then it should be taken down. However, it depends on who's running it. Who's running it? Because you could say that, Todd, are you going to challenge me?
No, I'm going to agree with you.
Yay, okay, give him a mic then.
I'm really the glass is half full and really an optimist.
I am too.
Like,
even though I know it didn't sound like it, but I really am a very positive
we need
person.
more of this, what you're doing and preaching, and this is right. The problem is, it's like whack-a-mole and the bots, and you're like whacking 2 and then like 6 come up, and you have to pick your battles as well. But the more education that you can do, and others like us in the community that believe in what you're saying, we just need to get out there and educate.
I mean, absolutely, because I think disinformation, we talk about like the values, people speaking out on social issues, it connects to so many different issues within society. I mean, look what's happening in the US with our gun violence. It is so, how are you going to pull that to, that would be such a long, it's like the cat's out of the bag for so long. And there's all these like mental health pieces attached to it, and safety, security. I mean, it's just so complex. So it's like, what are the things that we can do? And you know, I sit up here and I clearly don't have the answers. And I'm like, what can we do as an industry to do more? Because we have the power to. And it helps us. It helps us so much, because then it increases our trust levels. I mean, where everyone reads the Edelman Trust Barometer. By the way, we're featuring a webinar in June on the Edelman Trust Barometer. If you want to attend, it's free. And it's 2 hours. I looked at the time and I was like, 2 hours, what are we doing? Is that a mistake? And they're like, oh no, they want to talk for 2 hours. So come to our 2-hour webinar. So, yeah.
One question I had, because you were trying to say, what could we do? And we had a very interesting panel yesterday about tech. I'm sure we all remember that. But you mentioned impact, that even that one-day spike could have an impact.
Right.
I know I had clients who, they want data real quick. They want their share of voice chart. They want something, but you might not have time to dig through it. Or you are in charge of dashboards, maybe not as much storytelling as you like. Have you guys had conversation about tools, technology, monitoring, reporting, and how we could look at that, even if it's one spike, how to show that impact?
No, I just sort of thought about it recently. but it's a really good point, right? Because when we look at, I know when I worked with all sorts of clients. You guys may have had the same clients, and they were like, "All right, here's the issue. Okay, it's just a spike. We're just going to go away. Look out, cookie winner, blah blah blah." But then you think, well, wait, are we really thinking about how much coverage did it get, or should we be thinking about what is the impact, and how does this align with our values? And as an organization, even if it's something that goes away really fast, and maybe it's not the stakeholders we care about, but should we? But on the other hand, is that the hill you die on, right? If you fight for every battle, then you're just like, no one really cares. So, I mean, yeah, I think it's taking a step back and saying, all right, here's the spike, here's the issue, but then so what? Who cares? Who cares how big the number is? But this is what someone's saying about us. This is the impact. How do we combat it? I'll just tell you from my perspective, and this is very controversial. We also have like a big Roe v. Wade decision happening in the U.S. So much happening in the U.S. It's very stressful. And like most companies have remained absolutely silent on it. And they're waiting for the official decision to come out. But it doesn't matter when the official decision comes out, because conversations are happening now. And if you look at the conversations around Roe v. Wade, they're happening now, and companies are like, we're just gonna stay silent until, I mean, Xeno Group, I have people who work at Xeno Group, really great. They leaked, there was an internal memo that leaked, and it basically was like, oh, it's too contentious, just counsel your clients to stay out of it. But it's like 50%, it's a divided issue. But people aren't speaking out about it. But does that violate your values when you talk about X, Y, Z, right? So I think those sort of bigger conversations outside of what's happening need to happen.
It's going to be something interesting. I think we think about the integrated evaluation framework for personal good impact, or very just bottom line impact. It could be interesting to start thinking about how do we create some variables and metrics in there to think about this as well.
Are you volunteering for something, Nicole? That sounded like a volunteer thing. You guys think she was volunteering? I thought she was volunteering.
I don't think so.
Something.
I don't think I hear it.
Are you leading it?
One more question. So.
Not so much a question, just following up. I was like, what can we do? United Nations. So clearly we did with
sustainable goals. I love you guys. Thank you.
Well, we've done a lot on misinformation and disinformation. Clearly, it was a big issue for us.
Yeah.
So, two things to note. Like, one of them is, one of the things we've really done a lot of work on is hate speech, because misinformation, disinformation is terrible. Hate speech gets people killed.
I mean, like the Buffalo shooting is a perfect example of that.
Yeah. So, and a lot of that work has happened at the platform level, because in a way that's your best entry point. Rather than having governments close down a website, do this and that, you have to do it, as you said, with Twitch. You have to do it at the policy level of the platforms. Like, what do they allow to be carried on the platform? So for hate speech, been working with the platforms to be like, you cannot carry this kind of content. If it appears, you have a responsibility. And the other thing is, and that's just sort of coming up, is like to create a global media compact where there's a commitment by companies to protect civil discourse in public spaces, right? That's really what we want to do. We don't want to, you can't speak, you can speak. No, people can speak, but it has to be civil discourse. It can't be in the pursuit of, some sort of malfeasance. That is really what we're trying to do. So those are two things that are happening. And then specifically, there's also the verified campaign, which is, is exactly what you were saying.
Yes,
like getting people to stop sharing, to think about what they're doing. So I know there are other campaigns like this, but that's more on the individual level, getting them to change their behavior.
Yeah, I think platforms are one answer, but there's still a lot of media outlets that get a lot of benefit from sharing disinformation. Even with the Nina Jankowicz issue, they did an analysis, and Fox News, conservative, 70% of the hour-long shows during this period of time mentioned her or the Disinformation Governance Board, right? It's such a minor thing to have that be a focus, right? So it's also, there's so many different outlets and so many different actors and players. It's just really difficult. I'll stop
I'm
talking.
so sorry,
Nicole.
guys. I see so many hands, but we are done. We have to be cut off. We have our next session. I'm sure Tina will be happy to chat during lunch and some of the other networking
Or
sessions.
cocktails. I also love
Cocktails, yes, yes, yes. But thank you, Tina, so much.
Thank you all for your
everything.
great questions. Thank Nicole for being an amazing moderator. Nicole Morio, LinkedIn.